Sophia pushed open the back door of the little cafe, the familiar scent of roasted coffee beans wrapping around her like a blanket. It was early morning, the kind of crisp New York air that still carried a bit of chill even though the sun was already awake. She tied her apron tightly around her waist, brushed a strand of hair from her face, and whispered to herself, "Another long day, Sophia. You can do this." For most people, working at a cafe was just a temporary job, something they did while waiting for something better to come along. But for Sophia, this job was survival. Every extra shift, every hour of standing on her feet, every aching smile she gave to strangers. It all meant she could keep up with her rent and save a little for her dream. Her dream was simple but felt far away. To study languages, to see the world, to use her love for French in ways bigger than just casual conversations. But right now, her world was this cafe, these tables, and the endless stream of people who came in and out. The cafe was already buzzing when she walked in. The soft hum of conversation mixed with the grinding of the espresso machine, spoons clinking against ceramic cups, and the faint music playing from a radio tucked behind the counter. Sophia greeted her coworkers with a tired smile. She had pulled a late-night shift yesterday, and the dark circles under her eyes gave her away. But she didn't complain. Complaining never helped, and besides, she believed that if she kept pushing, someday something good would come. She started her morning routine, wiping down tables, arranging sugar jars, checking the menus. She moved quickly, almost like a dancer who knew every step of her performance. Customers were already seated. Businessmen in pressed suits typing on laptops, students with notebooks spread across the table, an older couple sharing a croissant. Sophia greeted each one with her warm, practiced voice. "Good morning. How are you today?" It wasn't fake. She truly tried to make people feel welcome. Even when her own heart felt heavy, she wanted others to feel light. But behind that smile was the weight of responsibility. Her father had passed away years ago, and her mother had raised her alone, teaching her French during quiet evenings when they couldn't afford much else. After her mother's passing, Sophia promised herself she would never let those lessons go to waste. She still carried her mother's small French dictionary in her bag, its cover worn and pages soft from use. Sometimes, between shifts, she would flip through it, whispering words to herself just to feel closer to her. As the morning rush picked up, Sophia moved from table to table, balancing trays with the grace of someone who had learned the hard way that dropping a single plate could mean money deducted from her paycheck. She refilled coffee cups, scribbled down complicated orders without missing a beat, and kept her calm even when a customer snapped at her for forgetting extra sugar. She had learned to smile through it all. To the people around her, Sophia was just a waitress, another face in the crowd of service workers who made their lives easier. Nobody knew how much she carried inside. Her fears of falling behind on tuition, the letters from the university reminding her that payments were due, her dreams of boarding a plane to Paris one day and feeling the streets her mother once described so vividly. To her, French wasn't just a language. It was a connection to her past and a key to her future. That morning, she felt especially tired, but she reminded herself why she was here. Every shift, every tip, every kind word mattered. Even when customers ignored her, treating her like part of the furniture, she held on to the hope that kindness still counted. Sophia had no idea that her life was about to take an unexpected turn. At that very moment, in a corner of the cafe, a man in an expensive suit had just sat down. He was quiet, almost invisible in his presence, but his eyes were sharp, scanning the room. He wasn't there for the coffee or the food. He was lost in his own world of meetings, contracts, and decisions that moved millions of dollars. To him, waitresses were just part of the background until something caught his attention. For now, Sophia continued as usual. She poured steaming coffee into cups, offered extra napkins to a mother with 2 restless children, and gently reassured a nervous student who spilled her drink. She worked with the same steady rhythm she always did, never realizing that her smallest action later that day would echo far louder than she imagined. The shift felt ordinary, almost too ordinary, the kind of day she thought she would forget as soon as she stepped out of the cafe doors. But sometimes, life hides extraordinary moments in the middle of routine, waiting for the exact second when kindness, chance, and fate collide. And as Sophia tied her apron tighter and hurried to greet the next customer who walked through the door, she didn't know that this was the moment when her life story quietly began to change. The bell above the cafe door jingled, and Sophia turned her head automatically, her practiced smile already ready for the next customer. A man stepped in, dressed in a travel jacket, with a folded city map sticking out of his bag. He looked around nervously, like someone who wasn't sure if he was in the right place. His eyes moved from the menu board above the counter to the tables, then back again, and his hands fumbled with the strap of his bag. Sophia had seen this kind of customer many times before. Tourists who didn't know the city well, who looked both curious and slightly lost. She walked over quickly, wiping her hands on her apron, and greeted him warmly. "Good morning, sir. Would you like to sit here?" The man smiled politely, but when he opened his mouth, his words came out in broken English. "Coffee? Milk, little sugar, please." He struggled with the order, his accent heavy, and he glanced around as if embarrassed. A couple of customers at nearby tables chuckled softly, not out of cruelty but in that casual way people sometimes react when they hear someone fighting with a foreign language. Sophia noticed the man's discomfort immediately. His cheeks flushed, and he lowered his eyes, clearly wishing he could just disappear. Something in her heart stirred. She knew this feeling. Being on the outside, trying to fit in, stumbling over words that felt strange in your mouth. She remembered the times her mother had encouraged her to never laugh at people trying, because it took courage to speak a language that wasn't your own. Without hesitation, Sophia leaned closer, her voice lowering just a little as she said, softly but confidently, "Bonjour, monsieur. Voulez-vous du café au lait avec un peu de sucre?" The man's head snapped up, his eyes wide with surprise. For a moment, it seemed like he didn't believe what he had just heard. Then, slowly, his entire face lit up with relief. His shoulders relaxed, and he let out a small laugh, replying in fluent French, "Ah, merci. Oui, exactement. Un café au lait, avec un peu de sucre." The shift in atmosphere was immediate. Where moments ago he was tense and struggling, now he spoke with ease, his words flowing naturally. Sophia smiled, her own French accented but smooth, her mother's voice echoing in her memory with every phrase. The two of them began chatting while she wrote down his order. He asked if the croissants were fresh, and she answered with a playful laugh, telling him they had just come out of the oven that morning. He told her he had just arrived in New York from Lyon, and she welcomed him to the city as though she were an old friend. Other customers turned their heads toward the sound of French filling the cafe. Some looked curious, others impressed. For many of them, French was a language they only heard in movies or romantic songs. Now, it was being spoken naturally at the small table by the window. Sophia didn't notice the eyes on her. She was too focused on making the stranger feel at home. For her, speaking French wasn't just about showing off a skill. It was about respect, about kindness, about remembering the lessons her mother had whispered to her long ago. Language is not just words, ma fille. It is a bridge. And in that moment, Sophia was building a bridge across two worlds. From New York to France, from loneliness to connection. The man leaned back in his chair, finally at ease, and smiled at her with genuine gratitude. "You don't know how much this means to me," he said in French. "I have been traveling for hours, and everywhere I go, I struggle to explain myself. You are the first person who makes me feel at home." Sophia felt her chest tighten with emotion. It wasn't often that her French came in handy here in the cafe. Most days it was just English orders for coffee, sandwiches, or pastries. But today, for this one stranger, her words mattered. She laughed lightly and said, "It's my pleasure. I'm glad I could help." When she walked back to the counter to prepare his coffee, she carried with her a quiet sense of pride. She didn't earn extra money for speaking French, and she didn't expect anything in return. But the simple joy of making someone feel seen and understood filled her with warmth. What Sophia didn't realize was that someone else had noticed too. At the next table, a man in a tailored suit had been sitting silently, sipping his espresso. He had barely paid attention to the bustle of the cafe until now. But when he heard Sophia switch languages so gracefully, When he saw her lean in with kindness instead of impatience, something about her caught his attention. He set his cup down, his eyes narrowing slightly as though studying her. To everyone else, Sophia was just a waitress. But to him, in that small moment, she became something far more interesting. Meanwhile, the French tourist continued to enjoy his coffee, chatting with Sophia whenever she passed by. He asked for recommendations about the city, and she scribbled down a few places on his napkin: Central Park, the art museum, a bakery she thought he'd love. She treated him not just as a customer but as a guest in her home. And every time he thanked her, it wasn't just for the coffee or the directions. It was for the feeling of belonging she gave him in a foreign land. Sophia moved through the cafe, serving other customers, but every time she caught the man's grateful smile, she felt a little glow inside. She didn't think much of it. This was just her job after all. But she would remember his words for the rest of the day. And she had no idea that this small act of kindness was about to ripple into something far bigger. Something that would change the course of her life. In the corner of the cafe, near the large glass window that overlooked the busy street, a man sat quietly, almost blending into the background. He was tall, dressed in a dark tailored suit that fit him perfectly, his silver cufflinks shining faintly under the warm lights. His name was Mr. Reynolds, though nobody in the cafe knew that. To the world outside, he was one of the city's most powerful billionaires, the kind of man who could close a deal with a single phone call and change the lives of thousands with one decision. But to the people around him that morning, he was just another customer sipping coffee in silence. He liked it that way. Mr. Reynolds preferred moments where he could step away from the constant rush of meetings, phone calls, and boardrooms filled with people trying to impress him. In those rare quiet hours, he would sit in a cafe and watch people live their ordinary lives. It reminded him of a time before his world became so complicated, before money and power built walls around him. That morning, he had come in with no special plans, just looking for a quiet corner to enjoy his espresso. He barely looked at the menu. His assistant had already recommended the place. He opened his tablet and scrolled through contracts, but his eyes didn't stay long on the screen. Something else had caught his attention. It was Sophia. At first, she was just another waitress, moving swiftly between tables, balancing trays, her smile polite and professional. He had seen countless waitresses before, in countless restaurants. But then, something happened that made him put his tablet down. He had been half listening when the French tourist struggled to order, stumbling through broken English. He almost tuned it out, thinking it was just another awkward moment he had no interest in. But then he heard Sophia's voice change, soft and melodic, as she switched languages with surprising ease. "Bonjour, monsieur." The words rolled out of her mouth naturally, not forced or mechanical. For Mr. Reynolds, it was unexpected. He glanced up from his seat and saw the tourist's entire face brighten, his shoulders relaxing as if a heavy weight had been lifted. Sophia leaned in, smiling warmly, making him feel at home in a city that wasn't his. It was such a simple act, yet it carried a weight that Mr. Reynolds couldn't ignore. He watched as the conversation flowed between them, French words filling the air like music. He didn't understand much of what they were saying. His business life had never required French, but he didn't need to. He could see it in their expressions. The ease, the laughter, the spark of connection. The tourist looked grateful, almost emotional, while Sophia looked as though she was doing something ordinary, not realizing how extraordinary it truly was. For years, Mr. Reynolds had been surrounded by people who spoke to him with agendas. Every conversation he had in his business world was about deals, money, or what they could gain from him. He couldn't remember the last time he saw someone speak to another person with pure kindness, with no hidden motive, with no thought of reward. It struck him deeply, though he didn't show it on his face. His expression remained calm, unreadable to anyone who might glance his way. But inside he felt something shift. He studied Sophia carefully. She moved with grace but not arrogance, her eyes lighting up whenever she spoke. There was no sense of showing off, no desire to impress anyone. She was simply doing her job, helping someone who needed it, using what she had been taught. And yet, that simple act revealed more about her character than anything money could buy. Mr. Reynolds sipped his espresso slowly, the bitterness lingering on his tongue, but his mind wasn't on the drink anymore. He was curious. Who was this young woman? Why did she know French so well? What kind of life did she live outside this cafe? As Sophia returned to the counter to prepare the coffee, he noticed something in her posture. She was tired, though she hid it well. Her shoulders carried a weight, her steps slightly heavy even as her face stayed cheerful. It was the kind of tiredness he recognized, the tiredness of someone fighting for something, someone who couldn't afford to stop. He thought about his own journey. Decades ago, before the billions, before the skyscrapers with his company's name on them, he too had known what it meant to struggle. He remembered working long hours, sometimes skipping meals, always pushing toward a dream that felt impossibly far. Watching Sophia, he felt a spark of recognition, as if he was seeing a reflection of his younger self. The cafe around him buzzed with the usual noise. Cups clinking, chairs scraping, conversations blending into background hum, but he barely noticed. His focus stayed on Sophia. He was a man used to reading people, used to scanning boardrooms and spotting hidden intentions. But here there was no pretense. Just a young woman doing her job with honesty and heart. For a man like Mr. Reynolds, who had everything money could buy, moments like this were rare. They reminded him of the value of things money couldn't measure. Kindness, authenticity, humanity. He leaned back in his chair, fingers lightly tapping the table, his mind already turning over thoughts. He wasn't sure yet what he would do, but he knew he couldn't just walk out and forget what he had seen. Sophia had unknowingly left an impression on him, one that was stronger than most people ever managed to make. And so he watched, silently, as she placed the French tourist's steaming coffee on the table with a cheerful "Voilà, monsieur." He watched as she wrote down recommendations on a napkin, her handwriting neat and careful. He watched as the tourist thanked her again, his gratitude almost overflowing. Mr. Reynolds said nothing. He didn't reveal his thoughts, didn't let anyone know that his interest had been captured. But in that quiet corner, a decision was already beginning to form in his mind. Something about this young woman was different, and he wanted to know more. What Sophia saw as just another ordinary shift was, for him, the beginning of something unexpected. She didn't know it yet, but her kindness had caught the eye of someone powerful, someone whose presence in her life would soon change everything. Sophia carried the warm cup of coffee carefully, the steam curling up in the air like a little dance. She set it down gently in front of the French tourist, adding a small plate with a croissant. "Voilà, monsieur," she said with a smile, her French words smooth and gentle. The man's face lit up again, as though this simple kindness had already made his day brighter. He leaned forward slightly and spoke in French, his voice now relaxed. "You speak beautifully. How did you learn?" Sophia laughed softly, a hint of sadness hidden in the sound. "My mother taught me," she explained, still in French. "She loved the language. We used to practice together every night. It was our little secret world." The man nodded, his eyes softening. "Then she must have been a wonderful woman. You honor her every time you speak." The words touched Sophia more than she expected. She felt a small ache in her chest, remembering her mother's voice, the way she would correct her pronunciation with patience, always smiling. For a moment, Sophia forgot she was at work, forgot the clatter of dishes and the ringing of the cash register. She was simply a daughter remembering her mother, sharing a piece of herself with someone who understood. The tourist took a sip of his coffee, then sighed happily. "Ah, this is perfect. I was afraid I would not find good coffee here, but you have saved me." Sophia grinned, switching back to English for just a moment. "New York has its surprises," she said playfully, then returned to French. "But you must try the cheesecake before you leave. That is our specialty." He chuckled. "Then I will trust your judgment. You have not failed me so far." As their conversation continued, it drew a few curious glances from nearby tables. People weren't used to hearing French flow so easily in this little corner cafe. Some smiled, some looked impressed, but Sophia barely noticed. She wasn't trying to put on a show. She was simply connecting with someone, making him feel at ease. Each time she passed his table to serve other customers, he would ask her something small, about the city, about the cafe, about her favorite places. She answered honestly, sometimes joking, sometimes thoughtful. To him, it was just nice to speak his own language so far from home. To her, it was refreshing to use French in a way that mattered. At the table nearby, Mr. Reynolds continued to watch quietly. He saw how Sophia's eyes lit up when she spoke, how she leaned forward with genuine interest instead of just nodding politely. He noticed the way she laughed. Not the forced laugh of someone pretending to care, but the kind of laugh that carried warmth. He had been around enough people to tell the difference. The billionaire had seen waitresses before, plenty of them. But most were focused only on speed, get the order, serve the food, move on. Sophia was different. She gave her time freely, even when she had other tables waiting. She didn't just serve coffee. She gave comfort. And in that small, crowded cafe, Mr. Reynolds felt something he hadn't felt in years. Curiosity mixed with admiration. Meanwhile, the French tourist looked happier with every passing moment. I was beginning to think New York was too big, too cold, he admitted, his French soft but clear. But today, you remind me that kindness can be found anywhere. You have given me the feeling of home. Sophia's smile faltered just slightly, her heart tugged by his words. She often felt invisible, rushing from one shift to the next, unnoticed by the world. But in that moment, she realized her simple gesture had truly mattered to someone. I am glad, she said softly. Sometimes, small things make the biggest difference. He nodded firmly, his eyes shining with sincerity. Yes, and you may not realize it, but what you did was not small. For a moment, Sophia felt her throat tighten. She quickly excused herself to check on another table, but inside, her heart was filled with a quiet pride she hadn't felt in a long time. She didn't often get thanked like that, not in such a deep and genuine way. Most customers barely remembered her name, if they noticed her at all. But this man had seen her, and that meant something. The cafe bustled around her, but in her mind, time slowed. She replayed the tourist's words in her head as she worked, her smile more natural now, her steps a little lighter. She didn't realize that another pair of eyes was following her every move, taking note of her kindness in silence. Mr. Reynolds leaned back in his chair, watching the scene unfold like a quiet observer of life. He could easily afford anything he wanted, luxury trips, fine dining, the best staff money could buy. But he knew money could not purchase what he saw in Sophia. Her kindness was real, her warmth untouched by greed or ambition. It reminded him of something he had long forgotten, that sometimes the most valuable things in life are the ones that come from the heart. Sophia, unaware of his gaze, returned to the French tourist's table one last time before his departure. She handed him the napkin on which she had scribbled a few places he might enjoy visiting. Here, she said with a smile. These are my favorites. Not the usual tourist spots. The real New York. He looked at the napkin as if it were a treasure. Merci, Sophia, he said, carefully pronouncing her name. You have given me more than directions. You have given me kindness. As he stood to leave, he pressed his hand over his heart briefly, a gesture of gratitude that needed no translation. Sophia watched him walk out the door, a small smile tugging at her lips. She turned back to her work, thinking it was just another moment that would soon fade into the blur of her long shifts. But for Mr. Reynolds, who had witnessed it all, it was not just another moment. It was proof of something rare, something he had been searching for without even knowing it. And while Sophia wiped down the table and gathered the empty cup, unaware of the billionaire's steady gaze, the course of her life was already beginning to shift. Quietly, invisibly, like a seed planted in the soil, waiting for the right time to grow. The cafe door swung open as the French tourist gathered his things, slipping his bag over his shoulder. He had finished his coffee and croissant, but his smile lingered. Before leaving, he turned back to Sophia one last time. Switching to French, he said warmly, "Thank you again. You gave me more than just coffee today. You gave me comfort." Sophia smiled back, her eyes soft. "Safe travels," she replied gently in French. "And don't forget the cheesecake before you leave New York." He laughed, waved politely, and walked out into the bright city street. The little bell above the door chimed behind him, and just like that, he was gone. The cafe quickly swallowed the sound of his departure, and life moved on. Sophia stood there for a moment, holding the empty cup he had left behind. Something about the exchange stayed with her. She had spoken French many times before, in small conversations, in quiet study sessions, in private whispers to herself when she wanted to feel close to her mother. But rarely had it mattered so much. Rarely had someone looked at her with such gratitude for something so simple. She carried the cup back to the counter, her steps slower than usual. Around her, the cafe was still busy. Customers calling for more coffee. A baby crying in the corner. The espresso machine hissing like a dragon. But in her mind, everything felt quieter. She found herself replaying the man's words. "You gave me comfort." That sentence struck her more than she expected. For so long, she had felt invisible. To most people, she was just the waitress. The girl who brought food and cleaned tables, who smiled when they were rude and apologized when mistakes weren't her fault. They didn't know her story. They didn't see the person behind the apron. But today, for one traveler, she had been seen. Not just as a server, but as a human being who mattered. She brushed the thought aside, reminding herself she still had work to do. She wiped down the tourist's table, carefully folding the napkin he had left behind with her handwritten notes of New York spots. She almost threw it away, but then she paused. For some reason, she folded it neatly and slipped it into her apron pocket. Maybe it was silly, but she wanted to remember the moment. Sophia returned to her routine. She checked on the older couple sharing a slice of pie, refilled a businessman's coffee without being asked, and carried plates to a group of students who laughed loudly over their textbooks. On the outside, it was the same rhythm she lived every day. But inside, she felt lighter, as if something inside her had quietly shifted. She didn't notice that Mr. Reynolds, still seated at his corner table, had been watching the entire time. He had seen the gratitude in the tourist's face, the warmth in Sophia's smile, and the way her eyes lingered thoughtfully after the man left. To him, it wasn't just an exchange of words. It was a glimpse of something rare. He recognized sincerity when he saw it. But Sophia was unaware of his gaze. For her, the moment with the French tourist felt like a small spark in an otherwise ordinary day. She didn't think it would matter beyond a memory. Still, she couldn't help but feel different. Her thoughts drifted back to her mother. She remembered being a little girl, sitting at the kitchen table with her mother's worn French dictionary between them. "Language is a gift," her mother used to say. "It opens doors you don't even know exist." At the time, Sophia thought of it as just a lesson about vocabulary. But now, as she stood in the cafe wiping down tables, she realized her mother had been right. Today, that gift had made a stranger feel at home in a city of millions. Today, that gift had reminded her that she wasn't just invisible. She let out a small sigh and leaned against the counter for just a second, catching her breath. The cafe's noise faded into the background as she allowed herself this tiny pause. It was unusual for her to stop even briefly. Usually, she kept moving non-stop because slowing down meant thinking too much about her problems. The overdue bills, the late tuition notices, the exhaustion in her bones. But this pause felt different. It wasn't heavy. It was quiet, almost peaceful. She looked out the window at the busy street. People hurried past, their faces buried in phones, their expressions tired or rushed. She wondered how many of them carried stories like hers, unseen and unheard. She wondered how many of them might be waiting for a small act of kindness to make them feel noticed. Sophia didn't realize that at the very same moment, Mr. Reynolds was studying her expression. He noticed the way she leaned against the counter, the faraway look in her eyes. He wondered what she was thinking. He wondered what burdens she carried behind that tired smile. To Sophia, it was just a pause, an ordinary moment between clearing one table and serving the next. But to the billionaire watching quietly, it was proof of something more. He saw a young woman who gave without expecting, who carried herself with dignity even when she was clearly worn down. He saw someone who reminded him of values money could never buy. And though Sophia didn't know it yet, This quiet, unexpected pause was the moment where the ordinary began to turn into the extraordinary. It was the breath before the change, the calm before the surprise that would soon leave her life forever altered. She tied her apron tighter and picked up her notepad again, ready to serve the next table. To her, it was just another shift to get through, another day of hard work. She had no idea that her small kindness had already set events in motion. Outside, the sun climbed higher, casting golden light through the cafe window, falling across the billionaire's table. He glanced at the papers he had brought with him, but his mind wasn't on them anymore. His attention stayed on Sophia, the waitress who had just shown him something priceless in a world that often forgot the value of simple humanity. And as Sophia carried another tray across the room, completely unaware, her story was about to change in ways she could never have imagined. Mr. Reynolds sat quietly in his corner, the half-empty espresso cup resting in front of him. Around him, the cafe buzzed with life, but inside his mind, everything had gone still. He wasn't thinking about the contracts waiting on his desk or the meetings scheduled for the afternoon. His focus remained on the waitress, Sophia, whose simple kindness had struck him in a way he couldn't explain. He had watched her long enough to know that what she did with the French tourist wasn't an act. She hadn't spoken French to impress anyone. She hadn't been trying to earn a bigger tip or to stand out. She had simply seen a man struggling, and she had reached out with what she had. A language she had learned from her mother. A gift she carried quietly inside her heart. That kind of sincerity was rare. Mr. Reynolds knew this better than anyone. In his world, most people wore masks. They smiled at him, praised him, and shook his hand, but behind their eyes, he could always see the hunger for money, power, or opportunity. He couldn't remember the last time someone did something out of pure kindness with no hidden agenda. Yet here, in this small cafe, he had just witnessed it. He reached into the inner pocket of his suit and pulled out a slim leather wallet. Inside, neatly folded, was his personal stationery. Small cards with his name embossed in silver at the top. He rarely used them anymore, but today felt different. He took out one card and placed it flat on the table. For a moment, he just stared at the blank space, wondering how to put into words what he felt. His pen hovered in the air. He could have written something formal, like he did in business letters. "Thank you for your excellent service." But that felt cold and distant. No, he wanted her to know that she had truly made an impression on him. Slowly, he began to write, "Your kindness is rare. The world needs more of it. Use this well." He paused, then underlined the last sentence with a firm stroke. It was simple, but it carried the weight of what he felt. Next, he reached into the other pocket of his jacket and pulled out a small white envelope. Embossed on the flap was a golden crest, the mark of a private jet company he often used for his travels. Inside was a ticket, first class, New York to Paris, open date. It was something most people would never even dream of holding. For him, it was just another booking, another luxury at his disposal. But for someone like Sophia, he imagined it could mean so much more. He slid the folded check into the envelope as well. It wasn't a small sum. It was enough to cover her tuition, her debts, and still leave her with the freedom to chase her dreams. Money was something he had in endless supply, but giving it with purpose, that was what mattered. For a long moment, he stared at the note and the envelope sitting on the table. He thought about walking up to her, handing it over directly, maybe even speaking a few words, but he stopped himself. That wasn't the right way. He didn't want her to feel pressured, or worse, to think it was charity. He wanted it to feel like a gift, freely given without expectation. So instead, he folded the note carefully and slipped it under the bill. He placed the envelope on top, tucking it just enough so it wouldn't be obvious to anyone but her when she cleared the table. Then, with the quiet precision of a man used to making decisive moves, he stood up. He buttoned his jacket, adjusted his cufflinks, and picked up his tablet. To anyone watching, it was the ordinary end of a businessman's coffee break. He gave no sign that he had just left something extraordinary behind. Sophia, busy at the far end of the cafe with another table, barely noticed him leave. She caught only a glimpse of his tall frame as he walked out the door, the bell above it jingling softly. She assumed he was just another customer heading back to work. But on his empty table, under the soft morning light, lay the quiet gesture that would soon change her life. A note filled with words that came from the heart, an envelope carrying the promise of opportunity, and a silent wish from a man who had everything but still believed in the power of kindness. The cafe returned to its usual rhythm. New customers walked in, others left. The hum of voices and the smell of coffee carried on, unaware that something extraordinary had just been set in motion. Sophia moved from table to table, her apron brushing against her knees, her smile as steady as always. She didn't rush toward the corner table yet. She thought she would clear it in a few minutes, after checking on the students near the window. To her, it was just another customer's table waiting to be cleaned. She didn't know that what sat there was not just a bill and a tip, but a doorway to a life she had only dared to dream of. Meanwhile, Mr. Reynolds stepped into his waiting car outside. As the driver pulled away, he looked back once through the window at the small cafe disappearing behind him. He allowed himself a small smile, rare and private. He didn't know what Sophia would do with the gift, but he trusted her. Something about her told him she would use it wisely, not just for herself, but for something greater. For him, it was just another morning, another quiet decision made without fanfare. But for Sophia, though she didn't know it yet, it was the beginning of something far bigger than she could imagine. And so the envelope waited, patient and silent, on the table in the corner, holding within it the power to turn an ordinary life into an extraordinary journey. Sophia finally made her way to the corner table, balancing a tray of empty cups in one hand and a cloth in the other. To her, it was just another table, another part of her routine. She glanced quickly at the surface. An empty espresso cup, a saucer, and the bill folded neatly on top. Nothing unusual. She set her tray down, picked up the cup, and reached for the bill to tuck it into her apron. That's when she noticed the envelope. It was not the usual kind customers left behind. Most left a few bills or some coins, sometimes nothing at all. But this envelope was heavy, sealed, and had a golden crest on the flap. For a moment, Sophia froze. Her first thought was that maybe the man had forgotten something important. Documents, a business letter, maybe even his credit card. Panic rushed through her. What if he came back looking for it? She didn't want to be accused of taking something that wasn't hers. She glanced toward the door, half expecting him to return. But the man in the expensive suit was gone, swallowed by the busy street outside. The cafe bell had jingled minutes ago, and she had thought nothing of it. Now her heart thudded in her chest as she carefully picked up the envelope. Her hands trembled slightly as she slid it into her apron pocket, deciding she would check it privately when she had a moment. Customers still needed her attention. She pushed the thought aside, forcing herself to smile as she delivered coffee to a table of students, then hurried back to the counter to ring up an order. But the envelope burned like a secret against her hip, refusing to let her forget. Finally, when the cafe slowed down, Sophia slipped into the small staff room at the back. She closed the door behind her, leaned against the wall, and pulled out the envelope. Her fingers hesitated at the seal. "Don't get carried away," she whispered to herself. "It's probably just a thank you note." She broke the seal carefully, sliding out a folded piece of paper first. It was a note, handwritten in neat, strong strokes. "Your kindness is rare. The world needs more of it. Use this well." Sophia read the words 3 times, her eyes stinging with unexpected tears. It wasn't just the message, it was the feeling behind it. Someone had seen her, not as a waitress rushing between tables, not as just another server in a name tag and apron. They had seen her heart. Her hands shook harder as she unfolded the rest of the contents. Inside was a check. When her eyes landed on the number, her breath caught. It wasn't a tip of $20 or even $100. It was an amount so large she had to blink to be sure she was reading it right. It was enough to erase her debts, pay her tuition, and still leave her with more than she had ever imagined holding in her hands. For a second, she felt dizzy, as though the room had tilted. She gripped the edge of the table to steady herself. "This can't be real," she whispered. She turned the check over, checking for signs of a prank, but the signature was clear and official. Before she could even process that, her fingers brushed something else inside the envelope. She pulled out a ticket, crisp and new, embossed with the logo of a private jet company. At the top, in elegant print, were the words, New York to Paris, first class, open date. Sophia gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Paris, the very city she had dreamed of her whole life. The city her mother had spoken of on quiet evenings, describing its streets, its lights, its language. The place Sophia had promised herself she would visit one day, no matter how long it took. And now here it was, a way to go. A chance so impossible it felt like something out of a storybook. Her mind spun in every direction. Why her? Why would a stranger leave such a gift? Was it really for her? Or had there been a mistake? She thought about chasing after the man, but he was long gone. All she had was his note, his words reminding her to use it well. Tears slid down her cheeks before she even realized she was crying. She sank into the chair, holding the envelope against her chest. All the long nights, the double shifts, the aching feet, the silent prayers for something better. They all came rushing back in a flood. This wasn't just money. It wasn't just a ticket. It was a door opening where she had only ever seen walls. Her first instinct was doubt. People like her didn't get gifts like this. Life didn't hand over miracles wrapped in golden crests. She wondered if it was some kind of cruel trick, if tomorrow she'd wake up and find out it wasn't real. But then she touched the note again, the simple, honest handwriting. Your kindness is rare. It felt too genuine to be anything but real. She thought of her mother, of the little French dictionary she kept tucked in her bag. She imagined showing her this envelope, this chance, and hearing her say, See, Sophia, your kindness will carry you further than you think. The thought broke her, and she let out a soft sob, covering her face with her hands. After a while, she wiped her tears and took a shaky breath. She couldn't stay hidden in the staff room forever. The cafe still needed her. Customers were waiting. She tucked the envelope safely back into her apron, close to her heart, and stood up. When she stepped out, the cafe looked the same. The hum of conversation, the clinking cups, the smell of coffee, nothing had changed. And yet, for her, everything was different. She carried trays with the same careful balance, but inside, her world had tilted. Her steps felt lighter, her smile more genuine. Every moment of that ordinary shift now shimmered with extraordinary possibility. She didn't know yet what she would do. She didn't know how this gift would change her path. But one thing was certain. Her life would never be ordinary again. The envelope, still hidden against her chest, held not just money and a ticket. It held the power of faith, someone's belief in her, a stranger's hope for her future. And that was the most shocking gift of all. The rest of Sophia's shift passed in a blur. She smiled at customers, carried trays, and wiped tables, but her heart wasn't in the cafe anymore. Her thoughts kept circling back to the envelope tucked safely in her bag. Every time she touched it, she felt a mix of fear and excitement. It was like carrying a secret so big that it almost didn't feel real. When her shift finally ended, she walked home through the crowded streets. The city bustled with its usual noise. Horns honking, people rushing, street vendors calling out their deals. But for Sophia, everything felt different. It was as if the world had shifted overnight, even though nothing around her had changed. She clutched her bag close, afraid she might lose the envelope, as if someone could see her secret just by looking at her. At home, in her small apartment, she placed the envelope gently on the table. The space was quiet, filled only with the hum of the refrigerator. She sat down, staring at it again. Her fingers traced the golden crest on the flap, and she whispered, "Is this really happening to me?" She pulled out the note again and read it slowly, word by word. "Your kindness is rare. The world needs more of it. Use this well." The message struck her harder now than before. This wasn't just money. It wasn't just a ticket. It was trust. A stranger had believed in her so much that he had given her the chance of a lifetime. And now the question pressed on her heart. What would she do with it? She thought of her mother. She remembered the evenings when her mother would sit by the window, telling her stories about Paris. The streets glowing with lights, the cafes buzzing with music, the river sparkling under the bridges. Her mother had never been able to go, but she had always dreamed of it. "One day, Sophia," she used to say, "you'll see it. You'll live the dream for both of us." Now Sophia had the chance to keep that promise. But at the same time, doubt whispered in her mind. Could she really just leave everything behind? Her job, her small apartment, the little life she had built here. It was all she knew. Going to Paris felt like stepping into a story that didn't belong to her. What if she failed? What if she wasted this incredible gift? For hours, she sat at the table, going back and forth between fear and hope. Her heart wanted to jump on the very next flight, but her head worried about responsibility. Still, every time she looked at the ticket, she felt her chest fill with courage. Finally, late into the night, she made her decision. She couldn't let fear chain her to the life she had always known. She owed it to herself and to her mother to take this chance. She would go to Paris. She would study, learn, and grow. And she would honor the gift by making something beautiful out of it. The next morning, she woke with determination. She called the number printed on the back of the ticket, her hands shaking as she spoke to the representative. Within minutes, her seat was confirmed on a flight leaving in 2 weeks. Just like that, her future had shifted. The following days felt like a whirlwind. She gave her notice at the cafe, her voice trembling as she told her manager she was leaving. At first, he thought she was joking. "Paris? You?" He laughed. But when he saw the seriousness in her eyes, his expression softened. "You deserve it, Sophia," he said. "Go make something of yourself." She sold a few of her things, packed her bags carefully, and kept the envelope close, almost like a lucky charm. Each night, she would sit with her mother's French dictionary, practicing phrases, preparing herself for the life ahead. She smiled more, too, because for the first time, the weight of endless struggle wasn't pressing down on her shoulders. She had been given freedom, and freedom gave her joy. When the day finally came, Sophia stood at the airport, her suitcase beside her. The giant windows looked out over the runway, where planes rose into the sky, carrying people toward new lives, new dreams. Soon she would be one of them. Her heart pounded as she clutched her boarding pass, the word Paris shining in bold letters. As she walked down the jet bridge and stepped into the plane, she whispered to herself, "Mama, I'm going." The flight itself felt surreal. She sat in a seat more luxurious than anything she had ever experienced. Flight attendants offered her meals she could barely pronounce, and she gazed out of the window as the ocean stretched endlessly below her. Somewhere between the clouds and the stars, she allowed herself to believe it was all real. She was really on her way to Paris. When the plane landed, and she stepped into the city for the first time, it was everything her mother had described and more. The air was filled with the scent of fresh bread and roasted chestnuts. The streets pulsed with life. Artists painting on corners, musicians playing violins under the bridges, people chatting in French all around her. Tears filled her eyes again. She wasn't dreaming anymore. She was here. In that moment, Sophia made herself a promise. She would not waste this chance. She would study hard, follow her dreams, and use every bit of kindness she carried to make a difference. She would live fully, not just for herself, but for her mother, and for the stranger who believed in her enough to open the door. Her new beginning had arrived, not with a plan she had carefully built, but with a note, a ticket, and an act of kindness that changed everything. And as she stood on the streets of Paris, she realized something powerful. Sometimes life doesn't wait for you to be ready. Sometimes it simply gives you a gift and dares you to take the first step. And Sophia had taken it.